Good evening, everybody. I'm Bob Durkin, President of the Greater Scranton Chamber of Commerce. I want to welcome all of you who have decided to join us for the conversation tonight on the proposal to move from a business privilege to mercantile tax for the city of Scranton and the Scranton School District. The Chamber has invited, and we're pleased to have with us, Larry West, Business Administrator for the city of Scranton. And Larry is going to take us through an educational session, I would call it.
Join the meeting.
On the various aspects of this proposal. The way that we're going to operate this, folks, is that through the course of the presentation, through Larry's presentation, if you have any questions, you can use the chat function at the bottom. We're going to be compiling the questions and comments. As we take a look at them, we're probably going to assume that a number of the early questions would probably be answered through the presentation. If not, we'll try to compile some of them, and depending on how much time we have at the end, we'll pose some questions. Larry has been kind enough to agree to answer any questions as well. We also have with us today Pat Laffey from the Scranton School District, the Business Administrator. Pat won't be part of the presentation, but I just wanted you to know that he was a part of the group here in case we have any need to.
Join the meeting.
Pat has agreed to be able to step in if we need to answer some questions on that front as well. So again, this is intended to be an information session, first and foremost. And so with that, I want to first of all mention that we are recording this. It will be posted on the Chamber website tomorrow. I think that's about it. So at this point, I'm going to step aside. Larry's going to come in front of the camera, and I'll be off to the side monitoring the questions and comments. Okay. Thank you, Larry.
Good evening, everybody. Thanks, Bob. I appreciate the introduction. I want to say thanks to all the folks that have signed on here tonight. I'd like to just give a little bit of background and my experience that I could talk about as it relates to the BP tax and the potential conversion to a payroll prep tax. My time with it starts back to 2015 when I worked for then Senator John Blake, who was instrumental in working with the legislature to allow for this
Join the meeting.
Potential movement. So my time with it, again, 5 or 6 years, we have been working to make sure the legislation was in place, to make sure that both parties and the requests that they had to allow for this to happen was in place in legislation. And we also have been working to educate those folks who would be charged with making this change, making sure they understood what was possible and where the benefits for it were. So if I can, start with, and as Bob said, if we have any questions, please put them in writing, and we'll see if we can't get them addressed at the end of the presentation here. So the table of contents, it's pretty much there's a list that we'll walk through here, but every single bullet point down here, it's very important that we understand that there are pieces of this that have impact, both in regards to city and school district, but also in regards to the businesses that this payroll tax would have impact on. So let's talk first about the facts regarding business privilege and mercantile tax. Something you should know is that the BP tax has been around since the 1960s, mid-1960s. The tax itself was enacted to allow local governments to apply a tax on benefits that would help fund things such as police and fire and other services that the city was responsible to provide for. This tax was repealed back in 1988 because it was deemed to be a nuisance tax. Eventually, that BP tax, because it was repealed, was eventually replaced. Those dollars replaced, but what we currently use as a local services tax, the $52
Joyce Fizzula.
Join the meeting.
The local services tax that we currently collect for $52 a year basically replaced those dollars in local government budgets. But But going back to the nuisance tax designation in 1988, the Pennsylvania Local Tax Reform Commission deemed it a nuisance tax because there was flaws in the drafting of legislation and lacked definition around the scope of the tax base and what it was actually providing in terms of services. So this dates back again to 1988. The tax reform of 1988 then prohibited local jurisdictions from imposing this tax on new businesses. So if you had the tax implemented between 1965 and 1988, you were grandfathered into allowing to keep the tax on the books, which currently the city of Scranton and the Scranton School District fall into that category. So the BP mercantile taxes are based on gross receipts for retailers, wholesalers, and some other services. An example of that would a BP tax would be some of your tire service dealers here locally that if you went in and replaced 4 tires on your vehicle, you were obviously buying tires at a retail price. You are paying for services to have those tires put on your vehicle. And then if you are still a tire sales and you're selling to a third, a smaller garage somewhere, that garage would then be paying the wholesaler's BP tax. So that's an example of a business within the city that would be responsible to reconcile for all 3 of those BP tax categories. And then there are some businesses that are excluded and are exempt from this BP tax, and that are manufacturers and financial firms, such as banks or investment firms that may be providing financial guidance to you. They are currently exempt under the business privilege and mercantile tax. So some additional facts about it. I think everyone should know this. This is kind of where we get to the discussion about the BP tax and some of its difficulties. It is very difficult to collect. Currently, the single tax office collects the taxes. The BP tax, for the lack of a better description, there's an abundance of tax avoidance as it relates to the collection on this tax. Some of it, we could deem. I don't want to be so disparaging to say that it's intentional, but suffice to say that there's an ability. If you're a new business and you open the city of Scranton, it is incumbent on you to then signal out to the single tax office at the opening of your business, and then in turn pay your BP tax throughout the year or at the end of the year to reconcile that. The tax avoidance piece is some businesses just knowingly or not knowingly they just don't pay it. So there are opportunities out there for this avoidance, and I don't want to say that it's rampant, but suffice to say, I think there's a fair amount of tax avoidance in the city. The Local Tax Reform Commission again declared this BP tax as an inequitable tax system back in 1988, and it's really comes down to tax equity, and we'll get into that in a minute. But again, think about how difficult it is to implement a tax. Just think about getting rid of a tax in our state legislature, and then to have the moniker of it being inequitable or a nuisance tax. So that talks right to the heart of why we're having this discussion about this ability to transition this tax. So efforts in recent years by both the city and the school district to collect delinquent BP tax has fallen short of our goals. That's for a number of reasons. Again, the difficulty in collecting delinquent taxes in and itself is an issue. But again, not knowing who has to pay it, when they're supposed to pay it, and then of course chasing after those who not knowingly didn't file for it, and then identifying those businesses and then chasing down to have them pay whole on their tax, on their BP tax. Something else I think you should know here, and I mentioned this a minute ago, Pennsylvania tax laws give local governments limited tools to raise new revenue streams. No one likes to pay taxes. I get it. I'm one, don't like to pay taxes, but at the end of the day, in order to provide services in a community and in society, we do need to have some revenue stream to allow local governments to be able to provide those services. And one other bullet point here in the end, and I know this to be true, the opportunity that Scranton has before today, the reason why we have it, the enabling legislation for it is allowed under Act 47. As most of you know, the city of Scranton has been under Act 47, the state's Act 47 distressed municipality ban for some 30 years now. The enabling legislation for the city to be allowed to convert from BP to payroll prep is actually embedded in that legislation. And again, I know, as I just mentioned before, the state tax laws don't really give a whole lot of tools for new revenue streams, but in this case, the city does have the ability. And I could tell you that there are multiple cities around the state that would love to be able to have the choice that we currently have in front of us. I'll also state that the Pennsylvania Municipal League has recently had some discussions about it, and they are supportive of this transition, not so much in support of Scranton, but in support of having other municipalities having the ability to go ahead and be able to transition to this payroll prep tax. So a little bit of background on the payroll prep tax. First of all, what is the payroll prep tax? The payroll tax is a tax percentage on the business's total payroll. So that includes bonuses, annual, or I'm sorry, your annual payroll bonuses, or any other thing that would be deemed income would be part of the payroll tax calculation. Some businesses that fall under the scope of the payroll prep tax: any business that employs one or more individuals, owns or leases properties for the business, maintains a stock of tangible personal property in the city, conducts continuous solicitation with the city related to business, utilizes the streets of the city in connection with businesses or other transportation. And this is the one I think that Bob had alluded to in regards to nonprofits. So charitable organizations are required to pay payroll expenses attributable to business activity allowed by Section 511 of the IRS code. I am not an accountant. I could tell you that I know the examples that were given, where if you were a nonprofit and you have a portion of your business that is a for-profit, your nonprofit actually derives profit from, that portion would then be susceptible to the payroll prep tax. Some additional background on it, and this is where I think it's important to talk about what I refer to as the ABLES. So it's equitable, collectible, and predictable. And these are really the three talking points that I've been trying to, when I talk about the payroll prep tax, is these are the three things that I think are most important. So the equitable part is, and that's the equity between the taxpayers and those who have to pay. That old adage, if everyone did a little, no one had to do a lot. That really seems to ring true here, that if there are businesses that are, the smaller the business, the less the payroll, the less the tax, the larger the business, the more tax that you would be required to pay on a payroll prep. So that being said, the equitable part is that those small businesses, entrepreneurs, small businesses that are really struggling month to month to pay their bills, to kind of get their fledgling business started, this is an opportunity here where if you have a smaller payroll, the equity in this is that, again, the smaller the business, the smaller the payroll, the smaller the tax burden is on the business. And from a collectible standpoint, collections are far more efficient as rates are based on payroll data, which is already collected for the purpose of the Scranton local wage tax. So to that point, the collectability part, as I mentioned earlier, about how we have this tax avoidance, if you will. Well, no one really gets away from paying their wage tax. So quarterly payments are made to local tax collector. This would just be part of that quarterly expense, and then it talks right to the predictability piece. But that quarterly payment would just become part of your quarterly tax payment to the local tax collector, and that gets me to the predictability. So currently, those who are familiar with paying the business privilege tax, it is based on your gross receipts. So as an example, if your business is making small widgets and you think there's an opportunity that over the next 6 months there may be an uptick in the request for those widgets, you're going to go out and you're going to maybe buy additional supplies or whatever it might be to make those widgets. You might even bring someone on part-time to sell those widgets for you in your retail shop. And at the end of the day, you're taking a chance on whether or not you're going to sell those widgets. Well, you may have a great summer, you may have a great winter, you may have a great fall, maybe you'll run out of stock, maybe you're ordering more supplies to sell for or to manufacture or make those widgets and sell them in your store. That being said, you're making those payments on your BP tax based on your gross receipts on the sale of those widgets. Conversely, on the payroll prep tax, it's based on the size of your payroll. The predictability piece comes in is you're not really sure if you're going to sell those widgets or you're not going to sell the widgets. And in the end, if you sell more widgets, you're going to pay a higher BP tax. The predictability with the payroll tax is if it's your business and you decide to bring on a part-time employee to work the cash register, it doesn't matter if you sell one more widget or not. You know what your tax liability is before you even sell one of those widgets, because it's based on the size of your payroll. So you can make some very good business calculations based on the predictability of what you're paying in your payroll tax versus the unpredictability of the business privilege tax. I hope I articulated that the right way. People understood it. I don't know. So some of the requirements: payroll amounts are defined as the amounts paid by an employer as salaries, wages, commissions, and bonuses. I mentioned that earlier. Payroll amounts will be determined by apportionment. Act 32, businesses located outside the city has a 90-day grace period for work registration. Again, they will all be required to pay the payroll tax, and employers are required to file quarterly. Again, I mentioned that in terms of filing quarterly with your EIT. This too would be a quarterly report. And this is another one: all taxes and penalties must be used exclusively for general revenue purposes. Again, that's part of the payroll tax requirement if we do have the ability to transition from the business privilege or to payroll prep. And again, I want to go back again and just reiterate the equity, the collectability, and the predictability. I think those three words really ring well, and they should be, as I'm walking through this, just keep those three words in mind as we're talking about this payroll prep tax. So some additional background on the payroll tax, and this is an interesting piece. And Pat, I know, is on the line here. He's listening. We've gone back and forth about this. Between the city of Scranton and the Scranton School District, our combined annual budgets roughly are in the area of $250 million a year. Under one municipality, we are coterminous with the same exact tax base, but we're talking here roughly less than $10 million in revenue as it relates to the current BP tax collections. So for the city of Scranton, we're looking at 2.5 million, and the school district at 7.3 million. Part of the legislation, the statute requires that your revenue upon the conversion from business privilege over to payroll prep would have to be revenue neutral based on previous year's business privilege collection. So we'll talk about the rate that we currently have listed and what the city has gone to court over, but we'll talk about that in a second. But the legislation, and this is something I think is very important and why this is timely today. The legislation, as I mentioned earlier, the enabling legislation for the city of Scranton that allows us to convert from business privilege over to payroll prep is listed under our enabling legislation is under Act 47. So long as the city of Scranton is under Act 47, that allows us, the enabling legislation allows us to convert to payroll prep. Why that's important is that the city of Scranton is currently poised to exit Act 47 no later than January 27th of 2022. So that puts us on a very short timeline for the city to be able to convert this payroll tax, to get all the legislation teed up, make sure we have the appeals process in place, and to have a collector approved to be able to take on this action. So there's quite a bit of work to do. Conversely, the school district does not have that restriction. The school district is allowed to convert to payroll prep tax even after the city has left Act 47. You may wonder why that is, and it's purely based on their enabling legislation when their statutes were passed to allow enabling legislation under certain acts allowed them to do certain things. The good thing for the city of Scranton is that we were able to get it. Unfortunately, it's under our enabling legislation is under Act 47, which means we must enable it before we exit it. So there are two distinctions between the two taxing governments here. Another important piece here, one of the bullets is no business privilege tax may be enacted concurrently. So we are not allowed to, and I'll talk about the Pittsburgh model in a second, but the city is not allowed to collect a BP tax and payroll prep tax at the same time. So we one point with the school district, I mentioned they could do it after they exit. Even though we exit Act 47, the school district could still change to payroll prep tax. One of the issues the school district has, and Pat, you may want to pop in here at some point, but the school district projects a lag in revenues of $1.8 million during the tax conversion in that first quarter. The reason why that 1.8 million, it's not that the city or the school district would not get the revenue. It is based on the way the tax collections happen. If the city and the school district enable this legislation and this tax effective January 1st, the tax collector would have to collect that first quarter of taxes. They'd have to process the tax, and then they would have to distribute the tax. That would be roughly a 3.5 month lag in collection before the next round of quarterly collections would happen. That's an estimated $1.8 million cash flow issue for the school district. That being said, it has not gone unnoticed. The Mayor Cognetti and some officials from the district have had some discussions, along with myself and Pat Laffey, to talk about how we may be able to work together to help the district overcome that lag in revenue. But that's something that's ongoing, and I'm grateful for the district that gave us the time to have those discussions. I think it is important to understand that, conversely, the city, as you all know, we're exiting Act 47 for 30 years. It is not like we are flush with cash. However, just based on that, we're 25% of that 1.8 million. So our revenue shortcomings are not necessarily as significant at that time as it would be for the school district. So the last piece on that is that there are ongoing efforts by the city and the state legislators to get assistance from the Commonwealth. We did reach out to Governor Wolf and his administration to see if there was some maybe last little hit for us to get us through this last quarter that would assist the school district if they were to convert. So that's just one last piece. So
Larry, I just wanted to add that I am on. Sorry, I had some problems
Yep.
unmuting myself, so I am unmuted now. Thank you.
Yep. So Pat, I don't know if you want to add anything to what I just said there. Feel free.
Yeah, I'll just talk about the period of collection as you already discussed. Obviously, the BP Merc was payable in the prior year. I'm sorry, in the current year based on prior receipts payable in around April. This would be a current year tax paid quarterly. So the district, as Larry already noted, anticipates that one quarter cash flow lag for 2022 in that first year of implementation. But as Larry noted already, there are efforts going on now to see how the district can address that. So thank you.
Yep. Okay. So next is some of the work that's already been completed, and I thank Pat for this Excel sheet that he laid out here for us. But basically, the city of Scranton was, as part of legislation, was required to petition the Court of Common Pleas in terms of identifying the rate. The school district, they also had some things they had to do, and they did by statute have to put this on referendum, which they did indeed do back in 2019, which it did pass overwhelmingly. So the Scranton voters overwhelmingly supported exploring the conversion of BP to payroll prep tax. Again, that was back in 2019. And the city did petition the Court of Common Pleas, and they did indeed approve what was at the time a calculated number. As you see, Pat put it up there, the combined rate of 1.085. So the things that we had to do to get us to this point, both the school district and the city have done that. So we've been working at this. This is nothing that it has not necessarily been shelved. COVID did kind of put the brakes on some of the talks and negotiation, but suffice it to say, some of the legwork, some of the most important legwork has been done. And I appreciate, again, the chamber offering me the opportunity to talk about this tonight, because I think it is important to understand. And this is this is where I think the rubber meets the road, and I think this is what some of the questions are around. This is some examples of payroll tax for some Scranton businesses. I will say to you that although specific names are not listed, I could assure you that the examples listed here are true examples of businesses that would have impact here. And I think it's just a simple conversion. It's the 1.085 times their annual payroll. So again, pizzeria with $150,000, $149,000 payroll, their tax liability under this plan at this percentage rate would be $1,650 for the year. And again, conversely down the bottom, and I'll just bring it, I know it's a discussion we'll have to bring up, as the manufacturer with a $6.3 million payroll, their annual liability would be about $70,000 to the payroll prep tax. And again, if you're a business and you're wondering how to calculate that, take your annual payroll, again, your total payroll, whether it's your weekly pay with bonuses and commissions, everything I mentioned earlier, and multiply that by the 1.085, and that should give you what your tax liability is. So some next steps into enacting the prep tax. So this is a little bit dated. Some of the dates are a little bit off here, but it's still pretty close. So again, I mentioned the school district has already had the referendum. They completed that in 2019. The city of Scranton did complete its petition to the Common Pleas in November of 2020. Tax policy working group. We have been, the Mayor Cognetti has had some folks from around the area, not just in the city, but folks from around from Lackawanna County and abroad, working on a tax policy working group. And it wasn't just to discuss payroll taxes, to discuss tax policy in general as it relates to how the city levies that on the tax base, residents and businesses and the like. So data preparation that's been in process, that bullet point, so I'm not sure the dates, but the city of Scranton and the school district both are under contract or have been under contract with two separate data collection services, eCollect for the school district and Turnkey for the city of Scranton. Both of them are doing data dives to see really where this information in terms of BP tax collections and businesses that are paying or have not paid or should be paying and are not paying. Those two businesses or those two consultants are doing work for the two different taxing entities. But in the end, I do believe that the data they will both present should be able to provide us with a really good base and a good starting point in terms of being able to convert this to a payroll prep tax. So the appeals process, adoption and implementation, again, I mentioned this earlier when I was opening up, that is one thing that we are working through is the appeals, because we have to have a process in place as part of our legislation for the city anyway. So that's something we're working on. Scranton School Board consideration. I know that this is all happening tonight because we had indicated that the school district will be holding a vote on this on September 13th. I believe is next Monday. So the school board, the mayor and I presented the same PowerPoint to the finance committee last week, and the finance committee put up for to have this put up for a vote at the full board on Monday. So I wish the board well, and hopefully we come on the right side of this discussion. So the Scranton City Council's consideration adoption, we're going to start the process in 2021. So what that might look like, and again, it's trying to do this jointly, is we have to put RFPs out for collection services. We have to prepare legislation. The district and the city have two different processes for passing ordinances and their regulations. In the city's case, this would be by ordinance, which would require 3 readings, which that takes 3 weeks. So there is some preparation for this. If we were to enact this before the end of the year, there is some work to be done. We're hopeful that we could do this with the school district as our partner. But again, the city of Scranton would introduce this legislation. It would become part of our 2022 budget, which has to be adopted by December 15th of this year. So the next bullet is evaluate options for most efficient means of collections. That is for an RFP. The city we've been working over the last several weeks to prepare an RFP with both the city of Scranton and the school district. The RFP would go out soliciting for a firm that would do our collections. We would do it within the RFP. It's listed as it'd be joint between the district and the municipality, or we would have the option to do it separately should the city or the district decide to do it alone. And I think this next bullet point is something that we should be looking at regardless of what happens, is that the city and the school district should be working jointly to determine the best path forward for delinquent BPM collections. Again, we've talked about the difficulty in collecting those taxes, even just identifying those who should be paying the tax. I think it's a long time coming, but I think the city and the district should be working together to collect those taxes. And I already mentioned the solicitation for the RFP for delinquent payroll tax collection services. And the next two I think are important. And I think that's where some of the questions are coming in. So the business and the public education and marketing for it. Again, I think that, this is a part that it's not necessarily my world in terms of marketing, but I do think that there are some folks a lot smarter than me around the table that can help us out in that space. That can, Victoria's saying no, I'm sure there are that can help us out to best describe and get folks to understand the importance and what the BP tax, what the payroll prep tax means for them. So this is a little bit we're talking about. This next slide is the business and public awareness piece. Some of the ideas that we've been talking about, some accessible webinars to learn the process. Here we are tonight. Thankfully, the Chamber has the ability to do this for us. Some outreach to the Chamber of Commerce, Scranton, Rotary Club, and other nonprofits and other business organizations that can help inform their membership. I think that's a key component, and the Chamber, of course, is taking the lead here tonight that can help at least their members have a better understanding, I hope, of the payroll prep tax. I think that the other important piece is, asking questions. I don't know how technical we could get in terms of specifics with your businesses, but what we can answer, we'll certainly get the answers for you. So some detailed information on city and district websites, again, promoting best practices and what the payroll prep tax means. Press releases, some media. There's no doubt that if our two taxing entities do agree to decide to convert, there's no doubt in my mind the media will be all over this for several days because it is a big step. And some social media and some posts and reminders about the impacts of it. And then from a technical side, we can offer some assistance on this, provide examples to businesses with similar payrolls, provide information on the appeals process. That would just be an ongoing educational piece that as new businesses come in or out, we would be able to provide some assistance in terms of some appeals or even if that business is required and what their liability would be and how to even get into the process. So this is one of the more important slides in my opinion. And this has to do with not being able to change tax policy. If I were to ask large national developers or land brokers, what are some of the impediments? They're always talking about workforce and workforce availability, but as it relates to paying taxes, the business privilege tax is definitely an onerous tax. Again, it's identified as a nuisance tax back in 1988, but it still seems to linger here in Scranton. So there's some legacy issues with it. The payroll tax is less onerous for those businesses I mentioned on the collectability piece and the predictability. So I think that in and itself, the BP tax from its history and the fact that the state has outlawed it over to a payroll tax in itself speaks for it as a tax standalone. So when we're talking about economic growth, we're talking about those predictabilities, the collectability, and the equity that goes along with it. I think bodes well for small business and entrepreneurs. And Pittsburgh is our only example of another municipality that has converted to this payroll prep tax. And we'll talk about some of the impacts they've seen in Pittsburgh. But suffice it to say, we have We've had some discussions all around the importance of tax policy. We've talked about earned income tax. We've talked about payroll taxes. We've talked about hotel taxes, and we talked about advertising and marketing and the visitors bureau and trying to attract other businesses to come to the communities or to our community. All those things really talk about what we're all strive for, and that's to create jobs and economic growth in our community. So that's why I think it's critically important that we have this discussion about our tax policies relates to the BP tax and the payroll tax. And I'm going to
Join the meeting.
I'm going to skip over the next one. Well, let me go back. I'm going to make the bullet there. So Scranton has an opportunity to adopt a modern tax with equitable scope and greater predictability, and open the future growth to more efficient tax collections. So when I talk about 21st, we all talk about 21st century technology. We want to be a 21st century city. I think we'd all be in agreement that our tax policy should also reflect some of those 21st century thoughts and those abilities to levy. Again, no one wants to pay taxes, but if we have to pay them, let's do it the most equitable way. And let's do something where we're going to talk about 21st century collection process that benefits the most here. It makes the most sense. So again, progress toward a modern, efficient tax system. Having no business tax obviously is the most desirable outcome for the city long term, but we all know that's a really difficult task. But barring the ability to strike a tax altogether, the payroll tax is a step in the right direction. Again, for those ables that I mentioned, the equitable, the collectible, and the predictable, they're the three words I think that really ring true as relates to this ability to convert on this tax. So let's talk a little bit about the history of Pittsburgh. Mr. Urbanik, who's the budget director for the City Council of Pittsburgh, I've had several conversations with Mr. Urbanik. So Pittsburgh had their enabling legislation when they were in Act 47 in 2004. As you can see there, the Act 222 established a payroll prep tax. The BP tax in Pittsburgh versus the payroll tax, and I'll share this story with you. This goes to the last paragraph. So Pittsburgh, and I'll talk about some of the differences between Pittsburgh and Scranton here. So the first thing is Pittsburgh, they set their rate, which was, as you can see, 0.0055. Pittsburgh had one opportunity to set that rate, and once it was set, they didn't have the opportunity to change it. We learned from that mistake because Pittsburgh arguably set that rate a couple of hundredths or tenths too low, and they actually lacked initially in their payroll collection, where the city of Scranton and the school district would have the opportunity to set the payroll tax, and then they would get one additional opportunity after a year of collections to reset that tax to make sure that the amount that we're collecting was revenue neutral. Another difference between Pittsburgh and Scranton is that the city of Pittsburgh had a 5-year phase out. So from 2005, and we're going to get to the next slide, I'll show you where they phased it out over 5 years. Pittsburgh had a 5-year phase out where they had both payroll and BP tax. Once that 5th year had completed, the BP tax was completely phased out, and it was just purely payroll tax. And you can see in the next slide. That one is the next one over, but so here's an example of the payroll. That's okay. So I don't want the double graph on it. One more. There we go. So here's what we're talking about in terms of the annual change in BP tax. This is Pittsburgh's information. You'll see they did have a slight increase from 1987 to 2002, and then they had a decrease in 3 and 4, which is when they implemented the payroll tax. The annual percentage changes, as you can see in the slide next to it, the green, where they had 8% annual change increases, 88, 89, smaller increases through the 90s. They had some significant increases in 2000, 2001, and then you'll see in 2003 and 4 they had some drop off in their growth. Again, this is Pittsburgh's model, and I know this is dated information, but it gives you an example of what it is that they actually went through in terms of the collection of business privilege tax from 1987 to 2004. So the next slide, you'll see this is actually where Pittsburgh, where they made their mark here. So you'll see on the left, 2005 to 2009, the blue in the bottom is indicating what they were collecting in BP tax as they phased it out. The orange was then what they collected in payroll tax. And you'll see in 2009, I told you they had missed their mark in terms of setting the rate. So in 2011, they were left standing just with the payroll tax. And you'll see through 2011, right up through to 2015, they had steady, significant increase in the collection of payroll tax. And if you recall, back in 2008, when we had the Great Recession, even with those declining numbers in terms of the economy growth, the city of Pittsburgh did indeed still see a steady increase in payroll tax collections. And they continue. One of the things that, and I know Bill's not on here, but I recall this message. I recall this conversation he and I had. One of the first comments he made to me when I called him, he said, if you have the opportunity, you'd be crazy to not implement the payroll tax. That's coming from a guy from Pittsburgh who went through it. They set the rate a little lower and still found a way to have steady growth in the payroll tax. And so here's some of the changes that have gone on since, and these are accurate numbers. Again, steady growth. One of the things that I didn't mention, I think it's important to understand, and this kind of goes to when we talk about the business privilege tax, again, gross receipts, it requires us to, in order for us to see some growth, we would need to see some significant change in terms of sales and service in our existing businesses. That's one way. But another way is adding businesses to the tax rolls. With the payroll tax, the organic increase comes annually just with the fact that businesses would give an annual pay increase. So once the rate is set, there would never be another change to the payroll tax in terms of the city or the school district setting that payroll tax rate. They don't get it after that first initial change. They're not allowed to change it again, so it's set. But the annual increase would come just in the fact that businesses would be giving an annual raise and they would increase their payrolls, would be an organic increase every single year. And as you can see, Pittsburgh has seen some pretty significant and steady growth here, starting with 6% in 2011. Their second best year was in 2018, as the economy was churning pretty good. So I think that the Pittsburgh model shows that we do, if enacted, the steady growth as opposed to what we're seeing in the BP tax as it was declining in 2003 and 4. And I think in terms of Scranton, I think our BP tax collections are pretty stagnant. We have not seen significant increase, although I've seen some small growth. And I think Pat could probably talk to, I know he has the numbers, they're not on the top of my head in terms of what the projected growth was in the rate of return for the conversion. In fact, I didn't mean to put you on the spot there, but it just struck me as I was looking at the graph here. But that's Pittsburgh's model. And in summary, the payroll tax has supplied as a stable source of tax revenue that is fairly applied against all for-profit. Is Pat there? Yeah. That's okay. Pat, if you're there.
Yeah, Larry. Hi, how are you?
Yeah,
Yeah, the estimate, yes. So with the rate of return right now, we looked at what we were seeing in growth in our EIT over the last 4 years, which was right around about 3%. When we looked at Pittsburgh realized about another, maybe just about over 0.5% growth above of what they were seeing in their prior year prior to the conversion. So as the district was projecting, we were using approximately 3.5%.
As an average annual increase in growth.
Correct. Yes.
Okay. Right. So that's pretty, I mean, that's pretty close to Pittsburgh's. I'm sure if we did, took theirs 6 or 7 years and added them and did an average on it, they're probably similar. I think what you mentioned, 3% was their number. But I
I
think that,
believe they were around 4% if you did an average over their last, I believe it was from 2008 to, I think it was over the last 8 to 10 years.
okay, very good. Thanks, Pat. I'm sorry for the technical difficulty. We're reaching across the room here and pushing buttons, and I'm not really sure how it all happens. I'm just reading off a script. So thanks for your patience. So the last slide. So again, for Pittsburgh, the payroll tax is supplied a stable source of tax revenue that is fairly applied against all for-profit businesses that operate within the city's limits. By better distributing the burden and basing the tax on salaries for those for-profit businesses, it has proven to be more dependable and easier to forecast tax. While there have been some problems, and this is again coming from Pittsburgh with the application of tax and transient businesses such as delivery services, in the scheme of things, these are small details that we continue to work through. All in all, the payroll tax has worked in the Burgh. And again, as you can see, that is a direct quote from the folks from Pittsburgh, because I wouldn't dare call it the Burgh, but they do. So, and that's what I have in terms of our presentation for tonight. I hope that I answered some questions throughout that presentation. Bob, I don't know if you had any. I do have 10 minutes or so. If you have some questions that we want to kind of walk through, I'm willing to do that.
One of the comments that came in separately, Larry, was a reference to the growth. And the comment is that payroll is an expense, and it doesn't necessarily mean profitability. A current issue, for example, is the issue of the difficulty in finding workers, which basically it is going to increase the wage tax, I should say the payroll prep tax, but not necessarily reflect profitability. So in that sense, similar to the challenges we've always seen with the gross receipts taxes themselves.
Right. So you're talking about the lack of, needing to increase payroll because of the lack of workforce. That's basically where you're going with that, right? So the increase in payroll tax. Yeah, listen, I think there's plenty of variables that, there's several models out there, and we've been going back and forth with the school district to try to figure out, the best way to present this so that we have a general understanding and a good understanding of what it would mean to those industry sectors. I think that was one of the questions that was raised regarding the size of the payroll and how do we help those businesses that are struggling to find workers, one, and number two, that the predictability, again, when you set your payroll, again, I think the predictability is you set that payroll and you have that predictable tax percentage rate set. Talking about those businesses specifically, I know you've given an example there. Again, all I can say is that I think the predictability piece is the part that's important here, that they can predict based on the size of their payroll what their liability would be.
Sure. Comfortable with commenting on either of these.
The tax, absolutely. Is there a next one down there for the payroll tax calculated on gross wages? Let's say all employed businesses locations outside the city. That's something I can get back to you on. So there is a piece of that businesses that are outside. I believe it's just within the city boundaries, but I'll get clarity on that. Will there be any exemptions for manufacturing payroll? In an earlier slide, you were projecting manufacturing payroll paid. So how much does that manufacturer pay at BPM? So right now that I can answer that one. So will there be any exemptions for manufacturing payroll? In an earlier slide, you were projecting a manufacturer of payroll 6.4 million would pay $70,000 in payroll prep. How much did that manufacturer pay in BPM? So that is one of the sticking points in terms of some of the businesses that are exempted from paying a BP tax. So currently, a manufacturer, that manufacturer is paying zero in terms of BP, but they would, under the payroll prep tax, would have a tax liability of $70,000. And will this at all affect companies not located in Scranton but have employees from Scranton? No, this is for businesses within the confines of Scranton. If the payroll prep tax is passed, will there be a BP tax due in April 22 for 21 gross receipts, or will the businesses just start with payroll tax for 2022 going forward? So whatever your tax liability was for 2021, so that's where we're talking with the school district. There's going to be a crossover here, but once we enable a tax for 2021, you would still have tax liability from 2021 that's due in 2022. But your tax for 2022 then would not be an end-of-year tax; would be a quarterly pay tax. Will this tax be on payroll for employees who don't live in Scranton but only work there? So let's be clear about this. The tax is not put on the payroll of the employee; it's put on the payroll of the employer. So if you don't live in Scranton but work in Scranton, your employer would have to pay the payroll tax based on your salary in Scranton. My company is an HVAC company that only does a couple of jobs in Scranton a year, with the tax only be applied to payroll from the Scranton jobs. Yeah, so that's part of the so the construction. That's again, I don't know who the HVAC company is, but at this point, even now, if you're doing work in Scranton, you should be paying a BP tax. So it would be just for jobs in Scranton. Will this apply to construction companies that has a job in the city but businesses located outside the city? Yes, it would. Any consideration for a cap or help protect larger employers? I'm not sure what that the cap you're referring to. Again, this goes to the equity where the rate would be set. I know that some of the larger companies, the larger employers that are out there, do have some concern, again, based on the size of their payroll. I'm not so sure what we could do in terms of capping or altering the percentage rates. I'd be willing to bet that there would be no wiggle room in terms of setting different rates for different companies. But again, I think that those businesses that are out there that would be looking for some, you're asking for some consideration based on a tax. There may be other ways that the municipality or the school, no, maybe not the school district, but municipality or state government could help offset other capital costs that you might have moving forward. But I don't think there'd be any room for consideration to cap it or to change the rate for companies. Are there any more questions? No. Okay. Bobby, you want to hop back in here?
Yeah, let me just say, I want to say thank you to Larry for taking the time out. I'm sorry, I apologize for some of the technical difficulties here. We're not a television studio, so we're trying to do our best. I'm sorry. At least a phase-in period for those currently exempt from.
Where is that at? This is the last one. This is
second to last phase-in period, similar to what perhaps what in a sense what Pittsburgh did.
Oh yeah, so that is not allowed on the statute. Phase-in period is not allowed. Once we pass legislation to convert, it is that taxing year conversion. We do not have the luxury that Pittsburgh had to phase in. So unfortunately, that would not be permissible.
Simply a comment on that.
Okay.
Again, the intent tonight was to bring basic information to our members. And as referenced earlier, the school district is going to be considering this on Monday night at their meeting at 7 o'clock. It's going to be at Scranton High School, the auditorium at Scranton High School. So with that, I want to thank everybody for taking time to be here. Thanks again to Larry West for giving us the tutorial. And obviously, from a chamber member standpoint, we'll continue to try to inform you as this process moves forward. So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Have a good evening.